Bianca Wells moved slowly toward the backstage entrance of the fashion show, the soft rustle of her thrift store dress the only sound she made beneath the steady hum of activity. The dress, faded and a little loose, hung simply on her slender frame, paired with scuffed white sneakers and a plain tote bag slung over one shoulder. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, careful not to smudge her bare face. No makeup, no jewelry, just the woman she was, standing at the edge of a world dazzling with opulence. Beyond the heavy doors lay a realm of gleaming marble floors and polished mirrors framed in gold trim. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly steamed fabric, laced with the low murmur of stylists discussing models and gowns shimmering with sequins and silk. Bianca inhaled quietly, the mixture of nerves and awe tightening her chest. She could feel the polished energy of the room vibrating under her feet. Heads turned sharply as staff and interns started noticing the incongruity of Bianca's modest appearance among glossy faces adorned with designer wear. A few whispered behind hands, lips curled in quiet amusement as their eyes flicked between her thrifted dress and well-practiced contours. "Lost, maybe," someone murmured. "Is she part of the crew or something?" another asked with a snort. Emily, the fashion intern in charge of backstage access, stood nearby with clipboard in hand. Her sharp gaze locked onto Bianca's plain sneakers and unbranded bag, narrowing as she stepped forward, lips tightening. Bianca's posture, nervous yet composed, seemed only to deepen Emily's suspicion. "What's this?" Emily muttered under her breath, before calling out loud enough for others to hear, "Hey, you there. This area is for staff and talent only." The subtle dismissal hung in the air as Bianca stood quietly, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Emily stepped closer to Bianca, her eyes sharp and cold. "Can I help you? Are you sure you belong here?" Her tone was coated in a polite fake kindness that barely concealed the disdain beneath. Bianca lifted her chin slightly, gripping the tote bag strap a little tighter. "I was invited," she said quietly but clearly. "I'm here to support the designer." Emily's lips curled into a dismissive sneer. "Invited? Do you really think someone like you gets invited backstage at this show?" She glanced pointedly at Bianca's thrifted dress and worn sneakers, then glanced back at the bustling elite crowd surrounding them. "This area is for models, stylists, and the people who actually make this event happen. You don't fit in." Around them, a few interns exchanged amused glances. One young man pulled out his phone, quietly filming the interaction, while others whispered remarks just loud enough for Bianca to hear. "What is she doing here? Did someone lose a mannequin?" Another snorted, "Looks like she's trying to sneak in from the thrift store clearance aisle." Bianca's heart hammered hard in her chest. She lowered her eyes momentarily but then looked up again, steadying herself against the sting of humiliation. "I have an invitation. Please, I just want to see the show." Emily laughed, loud and sharp. "An invitation? I'd like to see it. Let me guess, it came with a mistake." She raised her voice to draw more attention. "She's probably one of those charity guests trying to fake it. Sorry, but this isn't your scene." The words cut like a knife, made heavier by the growing crowd's laughter and murmured agreement. At that moment, a slim intern with a clipboard stepped closer, glancing briefly at Bianca and then meeting Emily's gaze with an approving smirk. "Yeah, we can't have just anyone wandering around back here. You need to go." Bianca stood frozen, the wave of sneers and amused stares crashing over her like months of doubt and frustration compressed into one unbearable moment. Her cheeks burned hot. Her hands trembled slightly, clutching the worn paper invitation she pulled from inside her tote, a fragile proof of belonging she was now forced to show like a fragile shield. "I just want to," Bianca began, but the words stopped in her throat as Emily's voice cut in again. "Look, honey, there's a line for the restroom, and no one's waiting to give you a tour," Emily said, blocking the door with an exaggerated gesture. "Why don't you head back to wherever you came from?" Some nearby interns laughed outright, others filmed Bianca's shrinking figure. The small crowd of backstage staff now fully gathered, whispering and pretending to busy themselves with their phones when in reality, they were focused on her. Bianca's breath caught. The sense of exclusion was so stark it stung deeper than any insult. The sheer unfairness of being judged by a dress and shoes so unlike those around her made her grip the invitation tighter. She felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away, swallowing hard, refusing to show any weakness. Emily continued, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "And before you ask, no, you're not authorized to hang around here. Security will escort you out if you don't leave on your own." The cold metal stairwell near the back looked suddenly like an exile zone. Bianca felt herself forced backwards, her feet shuffling as she was subtly but unmistakably pushed aside by a burly staff member who appeared, as if summoned, from around the corner. Despite her efforts to maintain composure, her lower lip quivered as she glanced around. No one stepped forward, no one protested Emily's words or the behavior of those filming. Even the designer's assistants, busy with their phones and urgent tasks, seemed to avoid eye contact. Bianca's gaze swept quickly over the indifferent faces, a blend of smirks, polite avoidance, and barely disguised amusement. Her shoulders sagged slightly as she accepted the cold, isolated stairwell as her temporary refuge. Her invitation now felt useless in a sea of judgment. She sat down on the hard metal steps, cradling her tote bag in her lap, heart pounding with humiliation and disbelief. The laughter and whispers continued to filter from the backstage corridor, a cruel soundtrack that made her small and foreign in a world so dazzling yet so unwelcoming. Her breath shuddered, and despite the heat, she felt a chill settle deep in her bones. A faint silence fell briefly when she looked around, eyes wide and desperate. The weight of all those watching and doing nothing pressed down on her. It was as if the room itself was conspiring to erase her presence. No one reached out to help or offer kind words. The world moved on, ignoring her discomfort. Her resolve flickered, but a slow and steady breath helped rebuild the fragile wall she had raised against humiliation. She had come here for a reason, she reminded herself silently. This wasn't the end. Emily, standing near the doorway, allowed herself a satisfied smile, chatting quietly with some interns about how smoothly she'd handled the problem. Her voice was low, but Bianca caught the thinly veiled malice. "We can't let these imposters sully the show's reputation. This place is for the elite, she doesn't belong." Bianca heard it all, yet she remained silent, eyes closed for a moment as she willed the sting of shame to pass. Minutes stretched. The room outside continued its gleaming activity. Bianca stayed put, still holding on to the invitation she had brought from home, a symbol of hope and purpose in a world that seemed to reject her at every glance. For a moment, the bustling crowd paused, then returned to their conversations, as if nothing had happened. Bianca sat alone, but her spirit, though shaken, had not been broken. Emily stood just beyond the cold metal stairwell, her eyes fixed on Bianca's retreating figure. In her mind, she rehearsed the justification for what she had done. To her colleagues, she was the gatekeeper, the defender of the show's integrity. Bianca, with her thrifted dress and worn sneakers, was a threat, an imposter invading a realm reserved for those with style, pedigree, and influence. Emily's anger simmered beneath her graceful exterior, fueled by years of clinging to this exclusive circle she dreamed of fully belonging to. Every new face that didn't fit the mold was a danger to the carefully curated image she and her team maintained. She whispered to herself, "This isn't personal. It's protection. I'm doing what's right for the brand." Back inside the brightly lit backstage, the atmosphere resumed its frenetic energy as if Bianca's brief disruption had never happened. Models strutted through in gowns dripping with crystals, assistants zipped past carrying racks of designer clothes, and makeup artists moved briskly between faces painted flawlessly for the runway. Laughter flared up again among staff and interns, their whispers now turning to gossip as they shared the story of how the thrift store girl had tried to sneak in. "I told you," Emily said to a fellow intern, an air of smug satisfaction in her voice. "You can't just let anyone waltz in here. This is the elite, our team's reputation is on the line." The comment earned nods and knowing smiles as the group circled around her. To them, Emily was a hero for maintaining the boundaries that kept their world polished and safe. Meanwhile, Bianca sat alone in the harsh stairwell, the cold metal bracing her back. Her heart still raced, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the plain, folded invitation she had brought with her, the proof that she belonged here, somehow. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, swallowing down the flood of emotions that threatened to spill over. It was more than humiliation, it was the sharp bite of rejection from a world she had long admired from afar. She took a deep breath, fighting to compose herself. "You're here for a reason," she murmured, voice steady despite the hot ache in her chest. "Don't let this break you." Beneath the tower of designers, stylists, and privileged interns, something inside Bianca began to stir, not anger, but a quiet resilience born of facing down dismissal before. She knew the judgment lavished on her wasn't based on truth but on appearances and cruelty disguised as tradition. As Bianca tried to hold on to calm, a sudden disruption rippled through the backstage. A sharply dressed assistant pushed through the parted workers, carefully carrying a small pot of rare white orchids and a folded envelope. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and the room's energy shifted instantly. "Is this for her?" the assistant asked, scanning the clusters of people with the orchids and invitation in hand. Emily furrowed her brows, stepping forward quickly, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Who is it for?" she asked, masking her suspicion with authority. The assistant held the note up. "For Bianca Wells. She's requested on the main stage immediately." Whispers exploded around the room. Bianca's name, spoken aloud and accompanied by such attention, felt like a spotlight on a shadowed corner. The crew stopped their work as their eyes darted from the assistant to Bianca, now hesitating nervously on the stairwell steps. Emily's smug confidence wavered, her mouth pressing into a thin line. Staff members nudged each other, phones snapping in frantic attempts to catch whatever was unfolding. Bianca's heart jumped wildly against her ribs. She felt every eye searching for her, the outcast, now summoned unexpectedly. There was no place to hide. And yet, she straightened slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in her dress, as if preparing for a moment that had just found its way to her. The assistant motioned toward her gently. "Bianca, please. The designer wishes to see you on stage." The air seemed to hush, thick with a mix of surprise, disbelief, and curiosity. Bianca rose, stepping carefully away from the cold relief of the stairwell. Her body no longer trembled with nervousness, it held a strange new strength. Emily's eyes locked on hers briefly, the contempt now replaced by something closer to fear or unease. She whispered under her breath, "What is going on?" The backstage staff and interns shifted uneasily, some lowering their phones as if recognizing this wasn't a moment for ridicule anymore. Bianca walked steadily toward the stage entrance, the scent of exotic orchids faint but sweet in the air, the once dismissive whispers replaced by a charged silence. The world she had admired, and that had so quickly rejected her, was now holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The bright lights of the main stage warmed Bianca Wells as she stepped forward, the hum of the crowd growing quiet with anticipation. Every eye was now fixed on her, the modest woman who moments ago had been dismissed and mocked backstage. The designer herself appeared beside her, tall, elegant, with an aura that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. The designer's voice, steady and full of undeniable respect, addressed the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, sweeping an arm toward Bianca, "I am proud to introduce Bianca Wells, the visionary artist behind this season's collection. Bianca's work isn't just about fashion, it's about redefining what elegance truly means. Her designs challenge excess and celebrate simplicity, sustainability, and strength." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bianca stood composed, her eyes bright but calm as she listened. The designer continued, "Bianca's choice to wear a minimalist, thrifted dress tonight is no accident. It is a deliberate statement that aligns with her philosophy and the spirit of her collection. In a world overwhelmed by fast fashion and superficial beauty, Bianca reminds us that true style comes from authenticity and purpose." Whispered conversations exploded around the room. Phones were lowered, eyes widened, and heads turned as people connected the modest woman before them with the trailblazing fashion innovator they recognized from magazines and social media campaigns. Bianca's name was murmured with awe rather than derision. The realization swept through the audience: this was the same Bianca Wells who had built a reputation for designing some of the most innovative sustainable garments, now standing quietly in a simple dress rather than the ostentatious outfits she was famous for creating. Emily, standing at the back of the room, stared with disbelief, her face frozen in shock. The sneer of earlier was gone, replaced by a flush of embarrassment and shame. She looked around as she noted the sweeping change in tone among the guests. Those who had earlier whispered and snickered were now avoiding her gaze, some shifting uncomfortably, others quietly apologizing if their eyes dared to meet Bianca's. Several guests approached Bianca nervously, eager to make amends or simply witness her presence up close. Bianca accepted their gestures with quiet grace but did not gloat or offer harsh words. Instead, she smiled, soft, genuine, emanating a power that transcended any snubs or insults she'd endured. Her demeanor was a delicate blend of dignity and calm strength. The designer stepped beside her again and spoke softly, "Bianca's story is one of perseverance. She was raised surrounded by people who valued utility over extravagance. For her, fashion is a vehicle for change. Practicality and ethics are woven into every stitch of her work." Bianca's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, she shared a glimpse of her journey, flying between small-town thrift shops and the world's most prestigious ateliers, building designs from discarded fabrics, determined to prove that style was not about price tags but passion. Her simple attire was her daily choice, minimalist, practical, a personal vow against the wastefulness of the industry she now sought to transform. The contrast was striking. Around her, opulence glittered. She offered quiet power wrapped in humility. The audience felt the emotional impact, all their shallow judgments laid bare by the raw truth of Bianca's presence and achievement. Emily sank back, defeated amid the shifting tides of admiration. The space once filled with scorn was now brimming with wonder and respect. Bianca's courage to appear as she was, unadorned and unapologetic, had illuminated an uncomfortable truth about exclusion and elitism. As applause rose, the designer placed a hand gently on Bianca's shoulder, signaling the culmination of this watershed moment. Bianca gave a final nod to the crowd, her eyes bright with gratitude but steady with the quiet certainty of a woman who had claimed her place without arrogance or revenge. The stage lights dimmed slightly, and as Bianca stepped away, the ripple of changed attitudes followed her every step. The fashion show, once defined only by glamour and exclusivity, now carried the promise of a more inclusive future shaped by authenticity and grace. The atmosphere shifted palpably as the designer turned toward the backstage entrance where Emily still lingered, eyes wide and shifting nervously. With deliberate authority, the designer spoke loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "Emily, I believe this calls for an important conversation. Your behavior tonight does not reflect the values we aspire to uphold. A collective murmur rose from the crowd. Emily's confident posture faltered as all eyes zeroed in on her. Faces that had once deferred to her now looked away in judgment or whispered critical remarks. Conversations halted, replaced by the unmistakable sound of social consensus turning against her. The designer continued, "This event is about innovation, respect, and inclusion. We cannot afford to alienate the very talent and visionaries who bring life to our shows. I am suspending your internship effective immediately. Let this be a lesson on the importance of empathy and openness." Emily's cheeks flushed bright red as murmurs shifted to whispers of gossip. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came forth. The sting of public embarrassment and professional rejection settled over her. Outside the crush of cameras and suits, the media caught wind of the confrontation. Emily's mistreatment of Bianca became a topic of social commentary in fashion circles and online communities. Clips from backstage circulated widely, exposing her arrogance and cruelty, fueling a backlash that swiftly eroded the promise of her budding career. In the days following, Emily was required to attend sensitivity training and public workshops on professionalism and inclusivity within workplaces. Her once bright path dimmed under the weight of collective disappointment. Colleagues greeted her with cool politeness, and her attempts at casual conversations were met with short nods or brisk exits. One afternoon, some weeks after the show, a quiet moment unfolded backstage. Bianca was reviewing notes in a corner when Emily approached tentatively. Her steps were uncertain, eyes cast downward, hands fidgeting nervously. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Emily said softly, voice tinged with remorse. "I was wrong to judge you. I've learned a lot since that night." Bianca looked up calmly, meeting Emily's gaze without bitterness or harshness. After a brief pause, she smiled, a slow, knowing curve of the lips. "Thank you," she replied gently. "What you do with that lesson is what matters." Emily nodded solemnly and stepped back, relief washing over her as she left Bianca to resume her work. The final image lingered as Bianca rose and walked confidently down an empty corridor bathed in soft light. Her steps were sure and unhurried, her modest thrift dress flowing gently around her. Behind her, the backstage remained still, filled with the lingering shock of change. Staff and guests who had once ignored or mocked her watched silently as she disappeared from view, her presence now etched forever into the history of the show. The place itself had shifted, an invisible line had been redrawn, marking a world where respect and authenticity would no longer be overlooked. Bianca's quiet power had transformed a world obsessed with glamour and privilege into one holding space for grace, purpose, and inclusion.